Factors influencing mistakes. Understanding the influences on error making. Introduction. What factors influence errors, causing slip-ups of the kind people mostly talk about, their regular and thoughtless opposites, and big mistakes in between, is our concern. People are renowned for their errors, unfortunately, not only cognitive but also motivational ones. Those who have to make important decisions are also especially noted for their mistakes. Cognitive affective motivational theories of error can help explain them. Much theory and research in both academic and genetic ethnographic practical psychology seems though to leave no room for such a monster as an error-causing factor. Because no list is intended to be exhaustive or exclusive, we use the term factors to do better justice to the roughly 70 developments that appear in the field. Such factors must be very general ones, and misused very creatively, because the length of a book precludes tight coverage of them all. Classic theories, which ground and guide our own proposals, feature centrally. However, storage capacity-related attention especially gets more attention than does the development of expertise. Other concepts of our main theories also receive insufficient attention. Aims of the chapter are to present the premises of the book on the various influences on human error, to link and extend earlier work on slips and on mistakes, to introduce and explain the metaphor implicit in the title of the book, and to give an overview of the chapters that follow. I have two main hopes, reflecting the dual purpose with which the book is written, somewhat along the lines of Machiavelli's The Prince. One is a practical hope, addressed to those concerned with the understanding and reduction of error, who are typically not familiar with psychological theories and experiments. I hope that this book will enable them to go about their task with full appreciation of the relevant psychology and in a much more tolerance-building, positive, and useful spirit than is often the case. My second hope is for a rather more theoretical contribution. Chapter 1. Psychological Factors. Of the 5 points listed immediately above, number 1 refers to the position of the task goal in the general goal-means network of goals. In other words, goals are top-level intentions from which lesser intentions are derived. They are high-level descriptions as to what people are doing. But slips of action occur at the lower levels of this goal-means network, being a feature of the less important but albeit intended means. This slip could be a component of the means serving a higher order intention, for instance. Later, put a similar point far less formally. He said that if one is occupied with a task of high priority, lower priority activities along lines can be undertaken at the same time, and the so-called mistake is generally a consequence of a relevant linkage at a lower level having become abysmally consensual and overlooked. In effect, the person made a deadline choice and forgot, mistakenly believing the activation was for the high priority task. In this section, I will discuss some of the psychological factors shown by cognitive and human factor studies to be influential in the error-making process. It must be emphasized at the outset that these are complex relationships to understand because they are often affected by states, skill, experience, skill decay, and motivation, among other things. But with that caveat in mind, here are some of the essential issues to consider when investigating human error with respect to psychological theory. Let me begin with the notions of slips of action and mistakes of intention. To introduce these concepts, reason argues that people typically know what they intend to do, their intentions, know that these intentions are achievable and can be met by personal pressures and environmental supports, the means at their disposal, possess skills, to operate the apparatus, understanding, and knowledge, for example, as to what can go wrong, possess a theory of what would indicate a failure in their plan, and can detect indications of this failure. The next section of the book discusses how a variety of local influences can affect the amount of cognitive load affecting people in various circumstances. The focus here is on transient aspects of the current situational level load, such as characteristics of interfaces, task instructions, and so forth. The following section shifts the focus of interest to transient user characteristics that impact the cognitive load imposed on people, such as mood, motivation, and perceived fit of the user with the task and the technology. After covering transient local influences, the discussion shifts focus to the individual differences in the chronic user capabilities that affect cognitive load, such as working memory capacity and long term memory ability. Concerns about errors should not be viewed as an isolated or neat topic, but one with deep connections throughout the discipline of psychology. This perspective is adopted in the current chapter. To begin an understanding of cognitive load, how one of the problems under focus can be defined, is established with an eye towards its linkages to human error. Cognitive load refers to how much space, in terms of how many items can be kept in mind or how much complexity can be processed in the current situation, can be accommodated by a primary cognitive system. Working memory has received the most focus as the locus or limit to the cognitive capacity used to regulate cognitive load, although recent work has begun to consider long-term memory in relation to retrieval from that system to be an alternative part of the cognitive system that can at least partially control cognitive load in its own right, or in combination with working memory. In regards to human error, it is essential to consider the role of skill and experience in the error-making process. Skill can be defined as the ability to perform a task effectively and efficiently, while experience refers to the knowledge and familiarity gained through repeated exposure to a particular task or situation. Both skill and experience can influence the likelihood of errors occurring, with higher levels of skill and experience generally resulting in fewer errors. Another important aspect to consider is skill decay, which refers to the gradual deterioration of skills over time when they are not practiced or used regularly. As individuals become less familiar with a task or lose proficiency in performing it, the likelihood of errors increases. Therefore, it is crucial to address skill decay through regular practice and training to maintain a high level of skill and minimize the occurrence of errors. Motivation also plays a significant role in the error-making process. When individuals are motivated and engaged in a task, they are more likely to allocate their full attention and cognitive resources to it, reducing the chances of errors. On the other hand, low motivation or lack of interest can lead to distractions, carelessness, and increased susceptibility to errors. In summary, the error-making process is influenced by various psychological factors, including states, skill, experience, skill decay, and motivation. Understanding these factors and their interactions is crucial for mitigating errors and improving performance in various domains. By considering the complexities of human cognition and the specific circumstances in which errors occur, researchers and practitioners can develop strategies to prevent, detect, and recover from errors, ultimately enhancing overall system reliability and safety. Chapter 2. Attentional Factors. Another attentional problem that receives a significant amount of attention and focus is slips of action. The term slips is commonly used to describe unintentional actions in which the person realizes that their intended action did not turn out the way they intended. These mismatch problems presuppose that the person is able to perceive the intended outcome of their action and has noticed the discrepancy. Capture slips occur when the person behaves as intended, but a strong competing stimulus distracts their attention away from the intended activity, often resulting in motor behaviors that are unrelated to their current goals. Such slips are frequently observed in aircraft pilots or individuals operating large vehicles, such as ships and cars. The driver or pilot may have a clear course of action in mind, but due to the movement of the plane, ship, or car, they may unintentionally follow the movements of the vehicle without consciously thinking about doing so. Moreover, there are various attentional factors that can influence task execution and serve as sources of errors. One such factor is the shifting of attention from one task to another, which can both delay reaction times and increase error rates. However, there exists a general issue in the psychology literature regarding this aspect, as most research has been conducted with highly complex tasks, particularly those that can be better characterized as supervisory rather than primary in terms of carrying out rule-based actions. Whether task switching in rule-based situations is more or less susceptible to errors than the type of rule-based tasks investigated in the current book remains an open question. Civilian and military aviation has witnessed numerous instances of pilots becoming incapacitated due to sudden and overwhelming fixation on a single stimulus, disregarding cognitive understanding and the importance of other factors. This phenomenon, known as planned continuation error, serves as a striking example. Other flight safety mistakes continue to be significant. For instance, during the 1981 crash of Flight 261 in the Canary Islands, the pilots failed to perceive the taxiway where they would ultimately meet their demise, despite having two opportunities to do so. Even after a malevolent declaration was made by the pilot, there was a false sense of security in monitoring the conflict from another position. Paradoxically, the fixation on this particular position only intensified their attention, causing them to neglect an apparent hazard amid their fixation. Only the spatula-shaped edge of the apron was visible from their vantage point at taxiway 2 as the enormous KLM Boeing charged towards them. It is not that information is absent or disregarded, rather the pattern itself disallows attention to anything else, leading to a critical oversight. The limits of storage capacity for long-term memory at the individual level are still not fully understood and can vary significantly from person to person depending on mental stress levels and quality of sleep. From a practical standpoint, this poses a challenge for risk management, as the limits of retrieval reflect the entire reservoir of knowledge stored within the human mind. Hindered by a sorting mechanism, one must sift through a vast database of concepts, ideas, and images when a specific piece of information is required in a given moment. However, this model fails to explain or predict failures that tend to occur during complex and high-speed, pattern-based behavior. Furthermore, it does not account for the fact that attention directed towards other aspects can also result in mental failure. Trivial or simple mental tasks are hardly the focus for professionals engaged in time-critical and complex operations, yet this model does offer a valuable correction for rising anxiety that, although largely inconsequential, could potentially lead to mental failure. Chapter 3. Environmental Factors. These results show that increased workload can lead to increased errors. However, in our day-to-day practice in hospitals, given the complexity of disease processes and treatments required, no consultant would leave their junior doctors alone to manage these workloads. Often, one-to-one support is not available. In that case, senior medical input would be exercised by offering supervision, adding value to the junior doctor's patient care processes by developing their knowledge and skills. The significant number of trainees and junior doctors in hospitals are there to not only offer clinical management support, but also to learn and progress from other clinicians, aiming to develop expertise and deliver the best patient care they can. In 2014, I was working as a general surgical registrar in the United Kingdom, working alongside Dr. Dottie, an energetic, conscientious, and capable colorectal consultant who was at the peak of his career. Like me, Dr. Dottie worked long hours and faced multiple demands. But on one day, as I covered ward rounds, conversations, and clinics, my time caring for inpatients, the outpatient department, and emergency theater, I made a mistake in clinical management that had the potential to result in harm. Dr. Dottie, who did everything simultaneously and was expected to make life-critical decisions within demanding time pressures, picked this up immediately, questioning me on my rationale. Human factors. People are taught about the remarkable overconfidence of humans in their performance. Indeed, our overconfidence leads to an underestimation of risks, especially when we complete repeated, complex, or dangerous activities without problems for extended cycles. Yet we all believe we are above average because we are used to the status quo. Something bad might happen, but it is just a part of life. For example, Air Force pilots are virtually always fatalistic about crashes. If it is going to happen at all, it will be to the other guy. Anthony, 1995. This tendency will manifest when the relevance of the activity is diminished over time. Research in educational psychology has shown that when people are solving problems and the solutions do not matter to them, that may have already been resolved or otherwise do not affect their status, they satisfy, find a sufficient response that might not be correct while avoiding cognitive effort. Mueller et al. 2002. If the solutions are of interest, the cognitive load goes up, but will also affect the decision speed of the solution. Marley and Alley, 2000. If the decision outcomes do matter, people are more reluctant to make guesses that can be falsified. Mueller et al. 2001. Principles of good design, such as providing for mistakes discovery and correction, allowing for error recovery, facilitating ease of monitoring status, and not overloading operators, are just as important as technical specifications and operators' procedural proficiency. Good workplace design includes putting relevant information where it is needed, easy distinction between normal and abnormal product states, clear visualization of process state, consistent and unambiguous labeling, and minimal reliance on memory. It also includes avoiding common cause failures, similar appointment of spare components, so that single failures do not cause widespread system failures. In tightly coupled operations, any error likely affects the downstream process. Switching from injection molding to plastication, for instance, interferes with the preset cycle and may result in a faulty product. Ergonomics and safety considerations usually drive a good environment. Good lighting levels and sound attention spans of no longer than 90 minutes also help with human performance. Though the focus of the investigation is not centered on noise levels, Smith et al. 2004 did implement a no-sound condition for one single work hour and 2-hour work periods of flight simulation in their mock-up aircraft environment, compared to the conditions of listening to either background music or ones of white noise. The experimenters found that when pilots were exposed to noise, the heart rate was louder than in the no-sound condition, leading Smith et al. to argue that noise appears to mitigate the physiological causes of fatigue that have been connected to aviation by imposing a degree of pressure on the person throughout the performance. P. 116. While it is still linked to noise, these previous findings appear to suggest that given that noise does not distract from the primary objective, rather the opposite, it in fact makes the consequences of making errors through apathy less dire. It can lead to purpose-directed performance and a subsequent reduction in errors. Two possible ramifications of this idea are that an office worker exposed to moderate noise levels may have an advantage over a quiet worker, and that the effects of moderate noise on driving performance might render listening to a bumpy surface of the day. Hallier claims that excessive noise can distract subjects from the primary task and therefore lead to errors. However, suboptimal noise levels can actually lead to a reduction in performance. Hallier provides an example of this by presenting the classic experiment of Egan, 1994. Egan found that moderate levels of noise led to better arithmetic performance, but low levels of noise led to a significant reduction in arithmetic compared to control subjects with no noise. For his own experimental work, Hallier suggests that optimizing noise levels for different tasks, and in some circumstances, for different parts of a task, may be important for minimizing error rates. P. 161. With additions such as snow, fog, rain, it is even easier to mistake someone for something else that is actually not in existence, and at times, or at certain directions, such minor natural factors of darkness can easily cause 20-inch tall people to appear 6-to-1/2 feet tall, and cars that are not there to appear in front of an individual. This can then generate panic reactions and other mistakes, slipping into EI production. Users of optical devices in daytime with restricted light conditions can cause blind spots and added distortions never before seen by the users. The story on the right shows you that a pedestrian casually crossing a quiet rural road during twilight was then immediately looked at through a binocular, which generated the sudden appearance of a vehicle along the same segment of the road. This is probably the most poorly understood aspect of EID and is often never taken into consideration during EID investigations. Thinking back on the Charles McGill case, he was shot a little before 6 a.m. It was dark, There was a small streetlight some 140 feet top south and another some way down the street to the left. The house he was approaching, from the side, had all its lights off and was unoccupied and up for rent. It was also far back from the street. The configuration of the lighting thus easily allowed Charles McGill to be mistaken for the more onerous placement of the man intimidating armed burglar walking down the street toward the officer some 30 to 35 feet in front of him, taken as being a threatening home invader by an onlooker forced to lie on the ground at gunpoint. Dismissed time period descriptions and statements, asserting that things looked obviously clear when they first appeared to be sighted. Well, where there was diminishing visibility under supposedly clear conditions of the time. Chapter 4. Organizational Factors. Organizations play an important role in the cultivation of human error. Most evaluations of errors are based on an assumption that rules and procedures have been observed. The design of work roles is themselves only rarely considered as a potential cause of nonconformance. Yet not only do organizations have production goals, they are also responsible for designing and monitoring the way their members fulfill these goals. In many respects, organizational factors can be thought of as a meta level since they include all the other factors presented in this chapter, providing the business in which human error occurs, setting the goals that have to be achieved, letting employees know what to avoid, demonstrating to them how they should organize their work in order to achieve the company's production goals, controlling non-normative acts, and finally controlling opportunities for learning. Fourth, the factors that influence mistakes focus upon feedback. That is, what is the effect on errors and future safety if those who have made a mistake are punished? It is often assumed that those who have not made a mistake will learn from the mistakes of others. This being one factor argued to contribute to the fall in airline accidents that had previously been at the level of epidemics. However, prospective punishment is a major deterrent to people admitting mistakes and to people providing those changes. Dynamic task analysis, after-action reviews, resilient organizations that will lead to improvement over time. That is, the fear of immediate punishment has greater implications for organizational safety than the error itself. This is part of a more general finding that errors are not distributed in a fair and equal manner. In healthcare, for example, mistakes are poorly linked to negligent behavior, preventable mortality and morbidity being more closely related to the non-attendance of experienced specialist doctors who are fundamentally more error-tolerant. As mentioned in Chapter 2, 6 Barriers to Error Prevention, of Sidney Decker's book To Stop a Moving Train, Exploring the Possibilities for Perfect Safety in Organizations, 2001, human factors have been in focus for several years. They are that we humans, with our mental and physical limitations, sooner or later will make mistakes. Basically, human factors can be divided into 6 different areas. Communication breakdowns, limit to human senses, we gather information selectively, memory management is limited, knowledge limitations, affinity for less stressful work, not preferences, and chose to take shortcuts. The violation of procedures can be part of the working process. You have to be a bit of a mechanic. A Study of Analytic Work is the title of an article about error making, written by Paul Faulkner in the UK in 2006. This is a really interesting case study to me. He described how errors occurred under conditions just like in Sweden. Complexity and uncertainty are 2 major information characteristics we must understand, and this is easily changed by the analyst and in the work. The article highlighted 6 different factors: literature-based, lack of car recommendations, that roles were not defined as good, that communication took place remote year, making noise, disturbances, and that the production system functioned as it should. Most laboratory work, including work in the undergraduate context, is performed in groups where there can often be confusion about individual roles. Laboratory experiments are often broken into parts, and students are given targets for each section. This means that sometimes tasks in a single experiment only reflect a small piece of the entire experiment, or even worse, students are only present when tasks which are only a subsection of the experiments are being carried out. Therefore, in these cases, students can be at a loss in terms of the real importance of their role within the team. If we probe the root causes of errors, lack of training and inadequate supervision/leadership is often an important contributor. During a series of workshops offered at international conferences and seminar series around the world, attended mostly by physics undergraduates and typically monodisciplined, 5 common training shortcomings have been identified that poor training, supervision, and leadership are important catalysts of mistakes. 1. Understanding the laboratory design and especially the limits of the laboratory environment. 2. Understanding the experiment that they are working on. 3. Understanding the equipment that is used. And 4. An inadequate perception of risk control and follow-up emergency planning. A lack of appropriate training, including basic laboratory training, has also been indicated as a key factor contributing to mistakes and near misses. This may be particularly prominent for trainees who are not fully prepared to deal with the unfamiliar work conditions typical in a laboratory setting. For instance, research involving non-physics majors working in a medical imaging laboratory at a university has suggested that trainees can be particularly susceptible to the incorrect use of equipment because they do not have a sophisticated understanding of electrical currents and some concepts necessary to use the equipment correctly. This leads to the need for the assistance of researchers who are more familiar with the laboratory, a result that echoes previous research indicating that it is a lack of appropriate training that is most likely to be the root cause behind near-miss events identified by undergraduate students. The CTAS continuously calculates discrepancy signals for each controlled variable and presents these discrepancies to the front-end workstations as visual displays. The magnitude and color of visual elements are altered to indicate the urgency of the associated action. Larger and more colorful items correspond to larger and more urgent discrepancies. This visualization allows the operators to determine which elements require action and to offer support for deciding on the relative urgency of needed actions. In addition to these fully automatic behaviors, the operator can influence discrepancy signals via the entry of nominal values and the creation of sequences. This uses the tail-centric task-specific functions that afford direct control over ordering and timing. Thus, the specific elements, values, and references displayed at a workstation reflect both the disparity between a controlled value and its reference, as well as the extent to which the operator needs to be occupied in other tasks. According to the first tenet of perceptual control theory, living organisms behave in a way that sustains the values of important variables required for survival. They function to drive these values towards specific reference points while simultaneously resisting forces that would cause deviation from these reference points. The comparison of a controlled variable's value with an associated reference value serves as the primary component of a control process. The discrepancy between them provides a measure of the necessity and direction for action. In general, the larger the discrepancy, the greater the urgency for action and the resulting force proportional to the urgency. As a result, the operator does not need to be fully aware, engaged in other activities, or even working for the CTAs to call for action from the operator. Chapter 5. Individual Factors. Since people are the ultimate source of effectiveness and error-making, individual predispositions for effective work are important elements deserving more research and attention. Understanding the ability, in terms of competence, knowledge, skills, experience, processes, and motivation, helps in creating theoretical models for competence-based decision-making and in recognizing the usefulness of hiring processes for the detection of relevant competences. Decreasing effects of individual ability range in the detection of risk information were recently seen in the context of radiology and X-ray diagnosis. In structured interviews with physicians, applied cognitive psychological methods, and the determination of the competence levels of flying experts have been tested for similar phenomena or predictions. Similarly to tests in the medical domain, These models are constructed and manipulated to increase the understanding of competence-based effectiveness measurements. Mistakes may also be influenced by individual predisposing factors such as personality, ability, and experience. In what is often considered to be one of the most influential models of error analysis, Reason 1990 conceptualizes the individual as an error-making machine, with each component of the machine being a source of mistakes in the form of either active or latent failures. Especially with respect to recent developments in cognitive psychology and human factors research, further insights into the influence of emotion and personality on error making should be gained, given that personality and individual characteristics can, in terms of decision errors, show stronger influences than environmental influences. In the following sections, some of the most important individual factors are discussed with regard to how research into effectiveness and error making could benefit from newly integrating insights from related disciplines. Particularly, it will be argued that neuroscience research should be regarded as an important and fruitful link to unite organizational and individual error making examinations. Cognitive fatigue is defined as a state of decreased ability to consistently process information using maximal cognitive resources. It encompasses a multitude of cognitive deficiencies over time and many different levels of human performance. The same concept is echoed with the psychological properties of effort or mental load. Over time, associated abilities decrease, leading to depletion in line with the depletion of finite cognitive resources that are available for cognitive processing at any given moment. It must be noted that, again, not all research on cognitive fatigue has been non-targeted with respect to focusing on performance errors. Many researchers have pointed out the direct impact of fatigue by attributing it to influencing minor but critical failures in detection accuracy and error rates. Fatigue and sleep deprivation are among the most widely studied factors influencing human performance and errors, and extend to various types of tasks, such as manual handling and maneuvering, goal-directed movements, spatial orientation, and planning abilities. This subchapter reviews the vast implications of these factors on error propensity, discusses methods to examine these influences, and suggests treatments and interventions. There are two means to directly influence fatigue and sleepiness in the laboratory: sleep deprivation and circadian-based manipulations. The past 40 years have witnessed a tremendous amount of publications on how these manipulations change performance and behavior across various tasks and domains. Since these can directly hamper performance and lead to errors, as described in the previous sections, they can therefore be widely regarded as risk factors within the context of safety-critical activities or in everyday life. For example, in a naturalistic study aimed at observing a chain set of human errors during extended helicopter operations, sleepiness was one of the most influential of 60 different risk factors that were assessed as causes for these observed failures. There have been few studies into emergency staff using the term resilience, but there has been acknowledgement that the ability of staff to cope in high-stress situations is important. Professions within the field of emergency medicine obviously require that doctors, nurses, and or paramedics remain functioning under high levels of adversity. It is important to be able to identify early signs of trouble and avoid inappropriate leadership, especially during major trauma instances. McConnell et al. Have suggested that resilience for clinical staff could be seen as a spectrum and not as black and white. Factors such as poor social adjustment skills, assumption of personal responsibility, and utilization of social support may influence an individual's work performance, with Simmons et al. Going further in identifying coping mechanisms and the ability to function after adverse traumatic injury, the ability to persevere. Such abilities should be perceived as important in the field of major trauma care, and enhancement of resilience should be sought. The effects of emotion on error-making are also of interest among medical personnel. It is widely recognized that emotions have implications for focus on the task and why, in general, we are more attentive when we are feeling positive emotions. Negative emotional states can detract from the task at hand and cause mistakes. When staff are demoralized, fearful about whether they are adequately supported, or perceive the organization as insensitive, this will impact not only on performance, but also on the attrition rates in the organization. Experience is not always a cure all. Experienced decision makers can still commit errors, particularly in complex systems. This phenomenon, the experience fallacy, assumes that experienced decision makers are not subject to the influences on error making discussed in the previous sections simply because they have more experience. There may be some types of decision making errors that occur more frequently in less experienced pilots. A review of safety critical decisions made while flying commercial aircraft demonstrated that more experienced captains made decisions that aligned with standard operating procedures more often than less experienced flight crew members. However, in non safety critical situations, first officers made a greater proportion of standard operating procedure compliant decisions when compared to flight crew members with more experience. Decision making can also be influenced by skill level and experience. The idea that more experienced decision makers are less error prone is intuitive, and post hoc analyses of the incidents and accidents that occur certainly support this position, as the proportion of errors that can be directly attributed to the pilot is higher for novice pilots when compared to more experienced pilots. Furthermore, individuals who have relatively more years and hours of experience in decision making tasks report fewer decision making shortfalls than their less experienced counterparts. While it seems intuitively true that experienced pilots make fewer of these errors, these may be due to some of the following factors. They are making those errors in their training which was not reported. They may be exposed to more challenging tasks in their daily duties, or they may simply be better at avoiding the errors. Chapter 6. Technological Factors. Recently, there has been an increasing amount of attention given to the psychological status in discussions of human-robot interaction. It is not inappropriate to classify numerous commonplace technologies as agents to some extent due to their engagement in sequences of actions that are beyond quick and easy anthropocentric predictability. In instances where workplace technologies possess agent-like mental models, errors can arise when these models break down. This is not a particularly profound point. In conversations about aviation maintenance, it is often said that a mechanic made an error by over-torquing a bolt. The theories regarding the factors that contribute to over-torquing are actually quite diverse, and they may draw attention to various aspects, such as the technician's responsibilities, the design of the aircraft, or the relevant tool. It is possible that the latter may have erred while the former carelessly neglected best maintenance practices. The factors that can influence individuals' tendencies to make errors include those related to technology, such as the characteristics of devices and systems, as well as factors related to the organization or work group. In this section, we will primarily focus on the technological factors. Unfortunately, little attention is typically given to the role of technology in the occurrence of mistakes. This neglect often stems from a premature judgment that it is irrational to blame the technology since artifacts, on their own, cannot make mistakes in a cognitive or intentional sense. Instead, artifacts are usually evaluated based on their success in mitigating human error, which can be either sympathetically or pejoratively judged. However, it is important to note that not all technologies are as distinct and distinguishable as William James dumbbells, wheelchairs, and pocket watches. Strategies aimed at trapping errors, as opposed to simply guiding users to complete tasks more efficiently, are heavily influenced by the design of the user interface. Information about error states and alternative courses of action is acquired through the screen and the error message mechanism. The error message mechanism, in particular, serves as the most crucial tool for trapping errors at the very last moment, rather than at the design stage. Both of these mechanisms have the potential to increase the error rate if used incorrectly. Therefore, the design of an error message manager, regardless of the specific methods employed, will have a significant impact on the mistakes users may make. The detailed design of a system primarily affects the rate at which users make errors, as opposed to other sources of error such as human or software standard operating procedures. Factors such as poor screen layout, illegible type, and ambiguous prompts do not interact with task performance in predictable ways. However, error-producing states resulting from inadequate screen design do not occur randomly. It should not come as a surprise that screen designs that are more likely to confuse users will ultimately lead to error states sooner or later. Users gradually become familiar with the structure of a user interface over time, which may lead to fewer errors occurring after the initial few hours of system use. However, the error rate will not decrease to the level achievable with a well-designed system. It has long been observed that technological efforts are becoming increasingly complex, and this observation continues to hold true. The issue of machine complexity should be of particular importance when it comes to controlling human performance. However, as noted earlier, the progress in developing high levels of automation has been slow, but not completely halted. The most evident result of the trend in system development is the increased division of work into more differentiated elements, often carried out at the boundary or by parties involved in a compound system. Essentially, people are increasingly tasked with handling exceptions. Consequently, what was once perceived as a holistic task now becomes open-ended and continues indefinitely. One factor that is frequently hypothesized to influence the occurrence of errors is the amount and complexity of the technology involved. This encompasses both the size of the system and the complexity of the interactions among its various elements. Complexity is not limited to technical systems alone, but also applies to decision-making in social systems such as flight crews and their organizations. Therefore, the label technology is used here to encompass all such systems, acknowledging the appropriate deviations. This chapter explores the concept of complexity and its implications for understanding error-prone activities. Complexity in systems has often been identified as a contributing factor to the difficulty in understanding accidents. A milder version of this notion is captured by Le Chatelier's principle, which suggests that a complex system tends to develop compensatory responses to minor disturbances. When analyzing incident reports, many researchers have found evidence suggesting that bugs, in fact, play a contributory role in failures, but they are rarely the ultimate root cause. Instances such as those found in various studies on support systems and fault diagnosis, the AUKEAD crash, or the opening of a non-transparent door on a Wessex 1 helicopter serve as examples of this phenomenon. The effect of the gap between the perceived risk and the actual risk on air traffic control and web applications also supports the viewpoint that software bugs can be distracting factors. When asked to consider real-world instances of human errors, many software practitioners tend to attribute failures to software bugs as the primary cause. This is not surprising given the substantial effort dedicated to eliminating such defects. However, this line of thinking can be characterized as a lack of imagination. In many cases, software bugs are the simplest types of errors to address. They can be diagnosed with clarity, easily avoided in the future, and are typically well managed in commercial software development. However, when they do contribute to system failures, they are often interconnected with other sources of failure. 7. Social factors. Social factors can have a significant impact on attention and influence our behaviors in various ways. Psychological research has consistently shown that people are more likely to pay attention based on the behavior of others in a given situation. Additionally, individuals may be more focused on social interactions and have their minds preoccupied with other people for social reasons. However, it's important to note that mental effort and workload can be distracting, leading to a reduction in attentional resources. Anxiety and stress are known to be primary sources of social facilitation effects. When individuals feel anxious or stressed, especially under time pressure, their attentional resources are diminished. Consequently, anxiety can significantly impact performance and lead to changes in behavior. For instance, activating thoughts of the task at hand can alter task strategies and negatively affect performance, as demonstrated in studies involving mental practice exercises like coaching in active learning or motion tasks. Interestingly, even non directed social thoughts stemming from social presence or exposure to social information during a learning task can influence behavior in a manner similar to theory of mind instructions. In certain situations, people's subsequent decisions may align with what they believe others expect of them. This could potentially explain social facilitation effects without the need to invoke specific motivational frameworks. The influence of others on mistakes is also a significant factor to consider. Direct social interactions can lead to discrepancies between what individuals should know and their actual knowledge, resulting in mistakes. Similarly, indirect social interactions, where individuals feel observed, can cause them to perform inappropriate or faulty actions that they would not typically engage in if there were no observers present. These types of errors may have multiple underlying causes and should be closely monitored. The FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, has conducted evaluations of pilots and controllers during challenging situations and observed that decision-making in aviation is influenced by a combination of individual, organizational, and technological factors. Controllers and pilots develop strategies that align with different aspects of these entities. On a related note, insurance companies may have stereotypical perceptions that lead to increased premiums for pilots' wives who report their husbands' mistakes and draw attention to them. Peer pressure is another relevant aspect in organizations, particularly relating to junior members feeling pressured not to raise concerns about potential issues that could have serious consequences. Air Force responders have reported instances where lower-ranking officers hesitate to question suggestions or actions from higher-ranking officers. Chapter 8. Human Error Models. The definition of human error is an inappropriate choice that would have been judged inappropriate or unsuccessful if it had been recognized at the time by the actor or if it had led to an untoward outcome that was recognized by the actor. Therefore, the development of models for human error is very challenging and filled with academic curiosity. This is due to the fact that whatever we do, it is all imperfect and human, even if success is achieved. The aim of human error modeling is ambitious. It is not only to look for a predictive theory that will improve the predictive power of some good models, but also to further improve them. In order to achieve a successful story of modeling, a clear analysis of what success means in human error modeling is needed. The success of human error modeling lies in the fact that human error is non-random and predictable. There are many resources, tools, and procedures available to humans in various disciplines that help guide or control processes and influence performance in an intended way. In human and machine interactions, these not only facilitate the interactions, but also introduce a new set of problems. Different resources, tools, and processes have been tried to understand the cross-cutting problem of human error in many domains. In the field of human error modeling, many different perspectives of the problem have been tried and developed over more than 30 years of studies. That being said, the identified factors which contribute towards coup design and the operational and safety performance of a process can also contribute towards facilitating error making. We can then assess the possibility of any of these gaps facilitating an error, whether through practices directly related to error making or through influencing the concentration behavior we include in our taxonomy. It now becomes evident why TQ and Q design, as an area, may facilitate errors. Of the Q design factors, 4 out of 6 do not only share path of influence to the operation performance of FEX, but to the operational safety performance of GACs as well. In his Swiss cheese model of creating accidents, James Reason, 1990, proposed that when someone is guilty of making an error or participating in accidents, those errors are caused by several factors or failures that accumulate and align long enough to facilitate an error. Using slices of Swiss cheese as a metaphor, the holes in the cheese are potential error opportunities. For errors to reach the end user, Someone must make the effort to align similar failures from all the factors. All the holes must align in sequence for an error to occur. Furthermore, reason distinguish between active failures and latent conditions. Active conditions refer to the last unsafe act performed by a person, in stark contrast to latent failures, which are active conditions waiting for a trigger to activate them. Thus, the goal of designing a safe process is to make the processes robust against perturbations while addressing the latent failures in a system and removing attrition from the error chain. When output results in a breakdown in the function of other mental mechanisms, a failure occurs. The origins of the failure are suggested to be in non-normative mental processing, a form of processing that is not performed considering the goal of the mechanisms in which it is being applied. One mechanism may consider that dropping a course when already deeply in debt is unwise, but impulsivity and over-optimism may ignore this information, leading to the selection of an action that is ultimately disastrous. So then the routes to error are stated as a breakdown in the goal-referent mental processes that exist for adaptation, confirming that the classical interpretation is still alive and well. This model asserts that error arises when a breakdown occurs in the fundamental reasons the mental mechanisms exist. The cognitive mechanisms are in place to help us adapt and thrive in the world, and mistakes are a result of a failure in this aim. Mental mechanisms begin with inputs, frequently from other mental mechanisms, other people, and the world, and process these inputs. Goals of varying complexity guide the process, and when the process completes successfully, it outputs adaptive results depending on the difference between the initial inputs and the goals. The accuracy and costliness of the outputs depend upon other factors such as noise within the mechanism, constraints on time and memory, and environmental influence. Also considered are maintenance mechanisms that help the other mechanisms operate to their potential. First, it provides a simple and easy-to-use tool. It can be easily used by trained managers who have not specialized in human factors-based analysis. Secondly, it helps in the identification of the important policies, practices, and procedures in an organization. It provides a valuable tool to those who seek to manage an organization in such a way as to reduce errors. It also suggests, particularly through the visibility of the influencing factors, potential means of managing these factors to help reduce error rates, and this can provide a more broad and systemic approach to promoting error reduction. Moreover, it offers direct evidence of the need regarding processes, policies, or systems of an organization, which often trigger responses and changes in management. Therefore, HFACS can be seen as having possible uses relating to change management, and in this capacity, it contributes to improved organizational safety by improving learning from error occurrences and reducing future error rates. Improving management and making organizations safety-focused when managing operations requires understanding the influences on error making. The Human Factors Analysis and Classification System, HFACS, is a broad, systemic approach originally developed to codify a range of influences on human error into a two-dimensional framework to obtain a comprehensive understanding of human error. HFACS includes subfactors: handling, monitoring, supervision, and control, each with their own subdivisions and examples, and influenced by a broad range of organizational policies, practices, procedures, and cultural factors. This provides a comprehensive working framework for guidance and error rate reduction for detailed analysis. When this approach is taken, it improves many error traces and ensures that the potential for errors is minimized. Ultimately, incorporating the HFACS framework into management strategies can enhance safety culture, improve organizational performance, and reduce the occurrence of errors, leading to safer and more efficient operations. Chapter 9. Error Prevention Strategies. On occasion, informal assessment of error production mechanisms and influences can suggest some ideas for prevention. For existing variations of causal paths, do percentages sum to 100%? Was someone in two places at once, or not present at all when the event occurred? Is there an unstable loop? For a new process, Are there design drafts that engender mechanisms for error, a copying from one place to another, requiring a precise step that is far from routine? Do processes ensure errors are detected and corrected, egg approval stages of documents? These are all indications of possible improvements to the original process. However, decisions about possible improvements cannot be made in isolation. If the final mechanism of causal action is present and healthy, do we want to fix it? More importantly, perhaps, are there undesired side effects of any intervention we propose? However, consensus on when and how to implement these strategies is rare, even within high risk industries employing professional staff. Most of these options are simply not available in commercial domains in which reliability is not usually an issue. Practitioners need to know when to use these techniques and when not to use them. They must have some way of deciding whether the use of a particular technique will actually make the problem worse because of some side effect. Finally, we want a broader conceptualization that can be used across all problems and contexts for evaluating possible error reduction strategies. There are a range of strategies that have been developed from the mixture of theoretical propositions and empirical investigation of the factors that may influence errors. Many of these are based on the idea of intervening in a process that is failing or has the potential to fail in some way or another. When bound up within an error model, these various strategies can contribute to improving system reliability. However, when the error model is less formal and more diffuse, the same generic strategies still have intuitive appeal. In fact, some error prevention strategies have become standard design mechanisms in systems that fundamentally rely on human performance, such as nuclear power stations or airline cockpits. Experience provides a person with knowledge of error and error avoidance, an understanding and feeling for both personal and human physiological and psychological limitations. An experienced individual also possesses a deeper understanding of plant operation and understands actual, as opposed to design or ideal, plant performance. The importance of training and education in reducing error making is clear. The pattern of errors committed by the well-educated person is significantly different from the one made by the uneducated or poorly educated person. The quality of education can influence error making. However, given two equally well-trained individuals, there is enough variability in human physiology and psychology among equally trained and experienced personnel to explain much of the observed variability in performance. Every person has his or her limitations, regardless of the level of initial performance, and there are circumstances under which those limitations reveal themselves. Error making is universal. However, there is variation among practitioners and between groups of practitioners in error making. We shall examine four major factors that influence practitioner mistakes: human physiology and error, training and education, professional competence, and management and culture. Traditional education and work experience are traditional training methods. Other skills training involves on-the-job or in-the-field experience. The general pattern of errors made by entry-level practitioners is quite different from that made by those with 3 to 5 years behind them. This experience reduction cycle continues. The need for organization goes without saying, yet it is the poor implementation of procedures that is most frequently offered as contributing to mistakes. I was rushing and didn't have time to do all the steps on the part file. It's in the wrong place. You have to look under philosophy. Every time I asked someone about the procedure, I got a different answer. And it's the one thing that changed. The original file names had no spaces, and now they do, being familiar complaints. Kakabad's Bank it Out. 1985 used soft systems methodology to highlight the effect of organization in creating conditions that lead to errors. This refutes the Taylorist view of mistakes as an exclusively human trait and points out the impact of defective organization on the being of the worker. As the working environment becomes more and more competitive, with client pressure to provide good systems at lower and lower costs, there is a move to write standard operating procedures without thinking about them too much. These procedures are frequently simply a reiteration of the correctness criteria. For instance, check file entry layouts. How is one to check them? These procedures do not help the less able employee at all and may contribute to errors since the argument, "It's okay, it's in the procedure," is an all too familiar one. On the other hand, the most useful procedures for everyday working use are often too informal for an audit trail. The procedures for checking off proofs and the use of checklists for indexing are valuable to experienced workers, but break the rules most frequently associated with good procedures. Procedures that are not user-friendly and don't always work will not be used properly and may generate a myriad of errors. Within safety-critical industries, the key functions and systems that lead to an incident are generally well developed. This knowledge not only guides safety assessments, but fosters a culture where it is possible to verbalize issues in a non-threatening manner. Additionally, reporting mechanisms may be built into these core processes, thereby providing a clear and well-traversed channel to convey any doubts or concerns. As such, these industries have some infrastructure to assist continued learning. However, in many less safety-critical but equally complex industries, core safety functions may not be as clearly identified, and understanding of what is a hazard and how to communicate doubts may not be as well developed. This paper will provide an overview of issues surrounding error reporting and how these may lead to skewed views of error proneness and error sources. Error reporting and analysis has long been considered a principal focus of safety-critical industries, as it can provide key insights into deficiencies in both systems and people. The ability to gain such information is one of the underpinning reasons as to why repeated accident analysis and consideration of precursors has such a key role within industries. It can encompass a wide range of information from basic error rates through to the contributory factors and functions that lead to a reported issue. However, encouraging employees to report on issues is difficult, and convincing those with technical skills to communicate more openly with their general and safety functions is difficult. Furthermore, the ease and usage of current error reporting mechanisms can also be limiting. Conclusion: we needed to take a step back from the problem and take a systemic view that related it directly to performance and learning. The challenge is to see how mistakes can be influenced all along a causal chain, but understanding that causality alone isn't enough to deliver a real cause to work on. We have derived our definition of the operational causes of mistakes, which takes a root definition of causation from the philosophy of mind and passes this concept downwards through mechanisms such as goals, skills, rules, and knowledge, down to the most basic influencing factors such as feeling hot and friendly. This can be seen as another piece of the jigsaw that immediately shows the systemic nature of mistakes and the wide range of influences and agents that need to be involved in seeking to reduce their occurrence. Although we understand the actions that lead to a mistake exist and how they relate to each other, we have not developed the necessary approach to measure quantitatively the causal chains that might exist. Further empirical research is thus necessary to develop methods to do this in order to understand in more depth the complex grammar or language, determining the relationships and dynamics of underlying mistake-prone mechanisms. If you found this content enriching and valuable, we would be deeply grateful if you could express your appreciation through liking and subscribing. Your support is incredibly meaningful and enables us to continue creating content that resonates with you. For those who think this is a great gift for yourself or for your loved ones, you can find the link in the description.